Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes running fast if you're the Car Chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Straight Shift. I had a hilarious thing happen this week, and it spurred this idea to do a podcast about VIN numbers. I look at car VIN numbers every single day. It's part of my process. When a client has a vehicle to trade, I run their VIN number, mostly to make sure that they typed it correctly. They didn't fat finger it, so that when I pass it along to a dealer to get a quote on the trade's value, I know I'm giving them a correct VIN number. I also use VIN numbers running Carfaxes, validating used cars. VIN numbers are just part of my everyday life. So this week, one of my clients down in Georgia took delivery of a brand new 2020 Honda CR-V hybrid. They just came out this spring. They started hitting dealer lots right about the same time coronavirus did. So it was early to mid-March. And I didn't really think anything of it, but I was passing along the VIN number for this new CR-V hybrid over to my client so that he could call his insurance agent and get the car put on the policy so that I could get that documentation to the dealer to make Honda Motor Finance happy and make the DMV happy. And I noticed that his VIN number started with 7FART. Yep. His VIN number started with 7 fart. And on a Monday, that just kind of cracked me up. Nearly, 2 decades in the car business, and I have never noticed a VIN number that actually spelled out any real English words. And maybe I just didn't notice that they did, and certainly have never seen one that spelled out something so just stupid, juvenile, hilarious. But I definitely noticed this one. So that made me start to think about, okay, I know how VIN numbers are generated. Was no one paying attention when this VIN number got generated? And it's not just his Honda CR-V hybrid. It's a whole bunch of Honda CR-V hybrids are going to have this 7 fart VIN number starting with. And I started to think, okay, nobody noticed that when this new VIN number for this new type of vehicle got generated. Is there not anyone who kind of quality checks these things? And what other interesting words might inadvertently get spelled out in your VIN number? Then I realized that most people probably don't really even know what their VIN number means, and yet it's a really important number in our society. So we're going to get a little bit nerdy here and decode VIN numbers, and I'll give you a little history on why we even have VIN numbers and where this standardized format comes from and why, and we'll get into doing a little bit of decoding so that you can figure out what your VIN number means, whether it spells out anything hilarious or not. So what is a VIN number? VIN stands for Vehicle Identification Number. Imagine that. And it's kind of like how Social Security numbers identify people and lets the various government agencies track us and, charge us taxes and all that good stuff. VIN numbers are very similar for cars. And interestingly, your Social Security number is not just a random series of 9 numbers. That means something too. The first 3 digits in your social are what's called the area number. And for those of us that were born prior to 1972, that represented typically the state in which you were born, or at least where the card was issued. So I was born in Ohio, so the first 3 of my social correspond to the state of Ohio. And nowadays or afterwards, it's typically represents the zip code in which the mailing address from which the application, the mailing address that was provided on the application for the Social Security number. And the second set of numbers, little 2 digits, that's what's called a group number, and that's issued within each area to further, identify people individually. And then the final 4 are your serial number. So yes, you as a human being in the United States have a serial number. Aren't you thrilled? And those are assigned consecutively. So like a Social Security number, VIN numbers also have a standard format, and each section in the VIN number stands for something. so that you can know really what that car is and where it came from. So, current VIN numbers are 17 characters long, and they consist of both numbers and letters, although there are certain letters that are not ever included in a VIN number. A VIN number will never, ever include the letters I, O, or Q. And that's because those can be easily confused with numbers when you're talking about a typed font. So obviously a capital letter I looks a whole lot like the number 1, and an O and a Q can easily be mistaken for a 0. So those numbers are just never used in VINs. They're illegal numbers. But that 17 characters, the easiest place to find your VIN number, if you want to look up yours, is there's a VIN plate on the outside of your windshield. It's like right near the bottom of your windshield where the wipers attach. So that's the first place you can look. And it's also typically on a sticker on the driver's side door jamb on most vehicles. But it's also on your insurance card and your registration card for easier reference. So if anyone ever asks for your VIN, don't worry about going out to your car and trying to read the VIN plate and hoping it hasn't faded. Just pull out your insurance card, which should hopefully be in your wallet anyway. Now, if your car's VIN number has less than 17 characters, two things could be true. Either you wrote it down wrong, which happens all the time, or your car might have been made prior to 1981, when the current VIN number system was implemented. VINs have actually been in use in the US since 1954. But from 54 to 81, there wasn't really a standard format for these numbers. So each different manufacturer just had their own system for tracking the vehicles. And that made it a little more difficult when we started getting into a more standard process for titling cars and registering cars, and for law enforcement to be able to more easily track cars when they were stolen. State governments used to use the serial number of a car's engine as its unique identifier when they were titling and registering it so you could get your license plate for the car. But engines used to get replaced a lot. Replacing your car's engine nowadays is considered typically a catastrophic failure unless you're for some reason doing it on purpose. But back in the day, it was not uncommon to replace the engine in a car. And so if the engine was the unique identifier for the vehicle, now all of a sudden it's the same car, it's the same chassis, but the engine is different. And that wreaked havoc with the government systems and just made everybody's life a lot more difficult. It also made it a little easier for car thieves to swap engines out and part out cars, and nobody could track anything. So this is why with your classic cars, if you've ever bought a classic car, a 69 Mustang or whatever, sometimes you'll hear in the classic car world, they will use terms like, oh, it's a matching numbers car. And that means that, the engine number and the chassis number and all the different serial numbers on the various parts of the car all matched up to what was original for that car. And that's how you know if you have a matching numbers classic car, it's original. Those parts haven't been replaced. And so those cars are obviously worth a heck of a lot more money. So the government in 1954, kind of said, got with the U.S. automakers and said, hey, we really need to start creating a little more standardized system. And so in 1954, they figured out a way to create what's now known as a VIN number. And that VIN was at least consistent between the vehicle's chassis, where the automaker started stamping it in really sneaky places during manufacturing, along with the engine. So that's where you get what's called a matching numbers car. But it still wasn't a standardized enough system, at least not to where it could grow with the speed that cars were being manufactured in the U.S. This whole car thing really kind of caught on and pretty quickly. So in 1981, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration wanted to further standardize that format, and that's the 17-character VIN system that we have today. That way, no car produced since then could be mistaken for any other car. And they worked with the automakers globally to standardize this across the globe. And the decodes for each of the sections of your VIN number decode a little bit differently, depending on the car and the manufacturer and the country. But there is a nice standard format so that we know, based on the VIN number, where that car came from, what kind of car it is, where it was manufactured, and a unique identifier to that one specific vehicle. Now, I have to kind of brag for just a second here, but my father, who unfortunately he passed away in 2009, but he was one of the fathers of pretty much the whole information technology industry. And he developed one of these very first systems to help the government track vehicles, and specifically track stolen vehicles, that ended up becoming part of the big national crime database system that is used today. So this is where I grew up hearing all of this stuff, and why I've probably become such a nerd is because I listened to my father talk about it since the time I was about 4 years old. So what do all of these numbers and letters mean in a VIN? At this point, you may want to pause this podcast, unless, of course, you're listening to it while you're driving or you're working out. But it might be helpful for you to grab your insurance card or your registration card, look up your vehicle's VIN number, or just Google any vehicle's VIN number. That way you can follow along, because it actually makes a little more sense when you're looking at it visually. But the first three characters in the modern VINs make up what's called the World Manufacturer Identifier, or the WMI number. The first character corresponds to the country where that vehicle was built. There's an exception for some European cars. It actually corresponds to the country where that manufacturer is headquartered, not necessarily where the car is specifically built. But for the most part, that number tells you what country the car was manufactured in. So if the character is the number 1, 4, or 5, it means the car was built right here in the USA. Vehicles that start with the number 2 were made in Canada, 3 were produced in Mexico. Then you start getting into letters like A is for South Africa, J is for Japan, K is for Korea, L is for China. Then you get W for Germany, Z for Italy. There's a whole smattering of lists, because cars are now manufactured literally all over the world. So that first letter is very, very critical. Now, the second and third digit in that World Manufacturer Identification number, the WMI number, that indicates the manufacturer, like Honda or Toyota. But again, it's a little more complicated than that, because it really codes to that manufacturer's, like the specific company. And while you may think that Honda, for example, Honda is the company that manufactures your car, but it's much more specific than that, because they actually create unique business entities for the different areas where they manufacture cars. So, for example, it's not just Honda North America is a company, but below that, like Honda Manufacturing Alabama LLC. So all Honda's manufacturing business in Alabama is its own business entity. And I'm sure that's for tax purposes and legal purposes and whatnot. But it also means that it gets a little more complicated when you have to assign a WMI number to them. So Honda will have more than one WMI number. Really, almost all the manufacturers, unless it's a small manufacturer that only manufactures cars in one country, they will have multiple WMI numbers that map back to them. Also, the third digit combined with the first two might also identify the type of the vehicle. So like if it's a car or a truck or an SUV. So for example, if your VIN number starts with 1GC, 1 Golf Charlie, guess what? You have a Chevy truck. 1 is the United States country of origin, G is General Motors, and C is truck. So a lot of the American manufacturers will request that their WMI codes also give you a hint as to what type of vehicle it is, typically because those vehicles are actually manufactured out of a certain subdivision of the company. And again, we're getting into really nitty-gritty business and legal stuff right now, but it's interesting to know how they come up with these codes. Now, the manufacturers do not get to pick their own WMI codes. Those are assigned by an independent organization called the Society of Automotive Engineers, or SAE. Sounds kind of snooty, huh? Well, they probably are, but they are a global professional organization. They're based in the US, but they're made up of, over, I don't know, like 140,000 members worldwide. And that group develops a lot of standards for technical industries, not just automotive, but also like aerospace and commercial transportation, a whole bunch of stuff. You'll see like, SAE standards on a lot of things. That's this group. A whole bunch of really smart people coming up with standards for things so that everyone can be held to those standards. So I'm wondering, does that mean the space shuttle has a VIN? I'm willing to bet the space shuttle probably has a VIN. Might have to call some of my NASA peeps and ask that. But it's cool. These nerds are also responsible for developing like the horsepower rating system for cars. So, I like them for that. But, as the automotive industry has expanded so much, especially over the last couple decades, the folks at SAE have to come up with these new WMI codes fairly frequently because the manufacturers are just getting bigger and bigger and they're expanding globally and we're just producing a bazillion cars. So that's where the WMI number comes from. SAE assigns that to the manufacturer for the division that is creating, whatever vehicle. So, for example, all the Honda cars that are manufactured out of their Alabama plant, those cars will all start with the same WMI number because they are all tied to Honda Motor Alabama LLC, or forget what it is. Now, the remaining 17 digits in your VIN, those are generated by each vehicle manufacturer, but they have to conform to the standardized format. So the next 5 characters, digits 4 through 8 in your VIN number, represent what's called the Vehicle Descriptor. And that's what identifies the model of the vehicle, the body type, like what kind of restraints it has. It can tell you things about the braking system, what type of engine, what type of transmission. It gives you a lot of that detail about the vehicle itself. For multi-passenger vehicles like your trucks and your minivans and even SUVs, that information might even decode to the vehicle gross weight class, and light truck manufacturers have certain things that they have to code into, those 5 characters. It's useful, especially if you're looking at a VIN number and you kind of know some of those codes, at least within a certain manufacturer. You can tell what kind of engine it is. So let's say you're a car like a Mustang, for example. It's offered in several different engine types. So, if you know what you're looking for, you can look at those 5 digits and know, oh, this is the V8 Mustang, or oh, that one has that wussy V6. I don't want that one. If the vehicle is offered in both an automatic transmission and, a proper manual transmission, there will be a code for the transmission in there. And you might be able to tell from those 5 characters if you've got, an automatic or you've got something with the right number of pedals. Each manufacturer has their own unique system for coding that information into 5 measly digits inside your VIN. And sometimes they even code them all the way down to the trim level of the vehicle. So you would know if you've got, the EX model or the Touring model. But not every manufacturer does that. But it's amazing that they can cram that much coded information into just 5 digits. And if you're a math nerd, if you have 5 digits, that's millions of permutations. So again, I'm getting kind of geeky. So on that nerdy note, I'm going to take a really quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about this special 9th character that is a check digit and why that's a super secret code and why that's important. Then we'll get into the last characters of the VIN number, and we're going to find out what happens, if car VIN numbers spell out things like fart. I'll be right back after this. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of or about finding the right car at a great price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 704-248-8706. That's 704-248-8706. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Automatic? We don't need no stinking automatic.
Straight Shift with the Car Chick.
Hey, and welcome back to the Straight Shift. Today we are talking about what does a VIN number mean? How does that decode to identifying uniquely every single vehicle that has been manufactured since 1981? And how do you end up with a vehicle whose VIN number starts with fart, like my client down in Georgia? I'm really glad he was a good sport about that. So we talked about the first three characters being the WMI, or World Manufacturer Identifier, and the next five are the Vehicle Descriptor. This ninth character in the VIN, it's this one little character that sits there, and it's called the check digit, and it's like a security code. It's one single letter or number that the manufacturer generates to verify the authenticity of the overall VIN number. Like, how the heck does that work? It's calculated using an extremely complex mathematical formula that I wouldn't go into even if I could, but it looks at it relates that number to the overall letters and numbers in the overall VIN, and then generates this just special check digit that makes it very, very difficult, if not impossible, for criminals to falsify a VIN number. So this is a digit that law enforcement will use to validate a VIN number. The DMV, when you call them and say you bought a car and here's the VIN, that check digit, their computer systems have the math that knows how to decode that digit and check it against the rest of the VIN to say, yep, this is a valid VIN number, or no, it looks valid, but it's actually not. Somebody just made this up. So that is what the ninth character is. That is the special check digit. The last 8 characters in your VIN number, digits 10 through 17, that is what's called the vehicle identification section. This is what uniquely identifies each individual vehicle. So that 10th digit, that indicates the model year. So that could either be a single letter or a single number. So for example, if it's a number 8, it represents the 2008 model year. And then you also get into letters. So, for example, the letter K represents the 2019 model year. It's pretty much sequential, but there are a few characters that they skip. That I, the O, and the Q that I told you about at the beginning that are never used anywhere in the VIN. But for some reason, they also don't use a U in this section of the VIN or to represent the year. I'm not entirely sure why. If anybody knows, shoot me a message and let me know. But if you think about it, okay, there's a limited number of, digits as well as a limited number of single letters in our alphabet. So how do we have enough of these to account for, decades worth of vehicles on the road? Well, that's a really good question. So, how do you tell the difference between, a K that represents 2019 versus a K that represents 1989 model year? Because K represents both. Now, granted, you're going to look at the car and you're going to know there's a difference between a 1989 car and a 2019 car. But when you're just looking at the VIN number, how do you know? Again, this is where it gets a little more complicated. Since 2010, everything from 2010 all the way looking into the future through the model year 2039, if you look back in the VIN number to the 7th digit, which was a part of that 5-digit vehicle descriptor number that gave you the model number and the engine and the transmission, that 7th digit relates to now this 10th digit. I know this is getting ridiculously complicated, right? So for the model years 2010 up through the future 2039, that 7th character back there is always going to be a letter. It's not going to be a number. So if you have that K in the 10th digit and you look back at the 7th digit and that is a letter and not a number, you know, okay, that's a 2019, not a 1989. But if you looked back at that 7th digit and it was a number, then you're like, okay, then it's a 1989. So you kind of have to look at the 7th digit and the 10th digit together to know which decade the vehicle is from, basically. Because remember, the National Highway Traffic Safety Association dictated back in 81 when they created this new system that there would never be two vehicles that were manufactured, within a 60-year period that would end up being identical. So they figured, okay, you're not going to have cars on the road for 60 years, a 1980, two vehicle or 1980 vehicle is not still going to be on the road 60 years later. Well, guess what? There are. So we have enough unique permutations of all the letters and numbers to get us through that 2019 model year. But what's going to happen in 2040? I don't know. Believe me, I don't think they know either. So, your guess is as good as mine there. They honestly haven't solved that problem yet. And who knows, maybe by the 2040 model year, VIN numbers will be like 3-dimensional and there'll be holograms somewhere on your car instead of just, a series of 17 digits or whatever. But they're going to have to come up with a solution because I guarantee you when we get to 2040, assuming we don't blow ourselves up by then, if the Earth is still around in 2040 and there are humans in cars, you're going to have some degree of overlap because there will be some people that have kept alive some of those, cars from 1980. I probably guarantee you that our 92 Toyota Tercel will probably still be on the road, 60 years later. So, it's a Toyota. So that's going to be an interesting problem to solve. Now, the 11th digit is a little bit simpler. That is the manufacturer's plant code. So they know exactly which one of their manufacturing plants the vehicle came out of. So the digits 12 through 17, that is the truly unique, what's called a production number. That is the number that gets assigned to the vehicle as it gets birthed on the production line. There's no fancy math or system here. It's literally just a sequential number. So the very first, car of that year, make, and model that gets spit off the production line at that plant will very likely have a production number of, 00001. So it's just sequential, nothing ridiculously fancy. So that is how a car gets its VIN number and what it means. This information obviously is way too complicated to decode it manually. And you'll get car nerds, especially, the folks that work at the dealerships, and have been looking, especially if they have worked with a specific manufacturer for a long time and they see these numbers, they know what they mean. They can look at, a Chevy number and know, oh, okay, well, this Corvette had the, 7-liter engine, not the 6-liter engine. And, we can look at it and go, oh, that car, that's a manual transmission, not an automatic transmission, because they just have gotten used to what the VIN numbers mean over the years. But it's very complicated and not even I can do that. So fortunately, there are databases. We live in a computerized world. So there are databases that do this for you. And you can go out and Google VIN decoder. And there's a bazillion websites that come up. The DMV has their own. The insurance companies have their own. I like to use a website called decodethis.com. Mostly just because it's just kind of a fun URL and it's really easy to remember and it just seems to have a little attitude. It's like decode this. So that's the one that I use when I'm looking stuff up. But the challenge comes when you get new vehicles. So every model year, there's going to be a new series of VINs that come out for a specific, the new vehicles for the year. But it's really gets fun when truly a brand new make and model comes out. And this has happened quite a bit over the last really 4 model years since 2016. We have seen brand new cars. We've seen a lot of hybrid cars. Even though the CRV has been out forever, the CRV hybrid is brand new. So it sounds like it's a CRV, but it's not a CRV hybrid. It's a totally different car. And so it's made in a totally different place than the regular CRVs. And so it has to have its own unique vehicle descriptor. It's going to have its, a code that corresponds to where it's produced, et cetera. So when these brand new makes and models come out, the databases have to get updated. And invariably, the insurance companies' databases are behind the times. A lot of these VIN decoders online, and only a handful of them were able to successfully decode this new Honda CRV hybrid. Decode this wasn't able to do it, so I had to go look somewhere else. But it was funny because my client called his insurance company to add this new car, and his insurance agent was like, that's not a valid VIN number. That car doesn't exist. Are you sure this is a real car? They were afraid that, he was being taken advantage of or, being sold a fake car by a scammer or something. And I had to call and explain, no, this is just a new vehicle that came out about, 2 months ago. Please update your database. So sometimes if you're buying a brand new make and model, don't be surprised if your insurance agent looks at you like you have 2 heads and you have to prove to them that, no, this is a valid vehicle. So interestingly enough, I was looking through this information and I was looking at the first thing that struck me, other than it spelling the word fart, it started, the Honda CR-V hybrid VIN starts with a country of origin code of 7. And 6 and 7 they map to what's called Oceania, which is just a fancy term for Australia and New Zealand. So 7 is usually for vehicles that are manufactured in New Zealand. The Honda CR-V hybrid is made in Indiana. That's a little ways away from New Zealand. So I was kind of like, what the heck? And I wasn't able to get a hold of anyone at Honda anywhere that had any clue why that was true. And that's really not their fault because, again, that 7FA is the WMI code, which is assigned by the folks at SAE. And there's more than 33,000 WMI codes, all of which you can have access to with a subscription to their database for $500 a year. Yeah, no thanks. So, it sounds to me like because companies like Honda are starting so many divisions and opening plants all over the world that WMI or SAE is having to kind of break their own rules about how they assign those codes. So since there's not a huge amount of car manufacturing in New Zealand, they're apparently sharing that 7 country origin code with Indiana. So, 7FA is the newly assigned Honda Manufacturing Indiana LLC, their WMI code. So, but it kind of threw me because I'm like, wait a minute, that's 7, that should be New Zealand. This is made in Greensburg, Indiana. What's going on? So I think we're going to start seeing more and more of a little bending of the rules with some of these, nicely planned out VIN codes, simply because I don't think anyone has really anticipated just how automobile manufacturing would blow up all over the world. But clearly, I don't think there's anyone checking that when these letter combinations get generated is really looking to see if they're not proofreading them. If you think about it, those first 3 characters are generated by this independent SAE organization, and then everything else is generated by the manufacturer. Therefore, it's possible that since the first 3 digits are coming from one organization, and the next few digits are coming from the manufacturer, that they could easily, get matched up into generating something that spells an actual English word. It's just really rare. I've not seen a VIN number spell any actual English words within those 17 characters. Although a friend of mine pointed out that his wife had a Land Rover and the first 5 digits of the VIN spelled out salad. And that's because SAL is the WMI code for Land Rover. And the first 2 characters, in that vehicle descriptor code from the manufacturer happened to be AD, so you put them together and you get salad. That's amusing and fairly innocuous. But, Honda managed to put these together and ended up with 7 fart for this poor Honda CR-V hybrid, which is kind of funny because theoretically, a hybrid vehicle shouldn't fart as much as a normal, fully petrol car. Now, if it was an electric vehicle, it would be really ironic because that shouldn't fart at all. But it kind of made me wonder, so if this one spelled out fart, are there any other interesting 4-letter words that might accidentally get generated with a VIN number because they're coming from different places? So I pulled a list of the WMI codes. Now, obviously not all 33,000 of them, but a fair number of them. Because I was just curious, is it possible for this to happen? Fortunately, I didn't see any VMI codes that actually start with like FUC or say SHI. But Freightliner has 2 WMI codes, 1 FU and 2 FU. So theoretically, they as a manufacturer probably shouldn't generate any vehicle descriptors that start with anything that's going to complete either of those 2 words, but they theoretically could. Mazda USA's code is 4F. Honda USA Alabama is 5F. So theoretically, if they're not careful with how they generate their vehicle descriptor codes, we could get some fairly colorful VIN numbers. I have not seen them, but this whole thing with the 7 fart on my client's VIN number, I needed a good laugh on Monday and just juvenile humor. It just absolutely cracked me up. But it does make me wonder, is there someone out there with the manufacturer when the VIN numbers are spit out of the computer system who goes back and proofreads them to make sure that nothing too colorful accidentally gets generated? I mean, clearly either nobody proofread the one for the Honda CR-V hybrid, or they did and were like, that's not too bad and everybody needs a little bit of a laugh today. So we're just going to kind of let that one go. So maybe there is a proofreader and he or she just had a great sense of humor. So now you guys know what your VIN number means. This standardized system is so important because it allows us to not only know a lot about a particular vehicle, but it makes it so much easier to title and register it, to track stolen vehicles, and even to do things like pull a Carfax so that we can see the history on a car before we decide to buy it. So I challenge you to go find your favorite VIN decoder on the web and run your own car's VIN through it and see what it says about your car. And if your vehicle's VIN spells anything remotely interesting, please reach out to me through the contact form on my website at thecarchick.com and let me know, because I'm curious. Are there VIN numbers out there that spell anything interesting or colorful? So on that totally juvenile note, I am out of here. Until next time, folks, drive safely.
The Straight Shift podcast is copyright Leanne Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of Leanne Shattuck or The Car Chick.